Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of V Radio. If this is your first time tuning into V Radio, you can check out my archives on either my YouTube channel or my Anchor podcast, which you will then find links to all the various other podcasting services like Apple Podcast, iTunes, etc. I've done a lot of interviews with activists, scientists, presidential candidates, senators, congressmen over the course of the years, documentary filmmakers. So I'm not right, I'm not left, I'm awake. I do have a left lean, but a lot of my content ends up actually being very critical of the left. So if you're on the right, you'll probably find a lot of things you enjoy as well. My main purpose in doing all of this, my channel is not monetized. I'm not making any money doing any of this. In fact, I'm spending money doing this, is to try to bring more of a clear, I would say, nonpartisan lens to the events that are going on right now in the world. And when I offer my opinion, I'm very clear about that, generally from the forefront of whatever it is we're discussing at that time. I'm going to have some great guests coming up. Daryl Davis has agreed to come on my podcast, and Ben Stewart, the filmmaker behind Chimatica and Esoteric Agenda, will also be on my podcast next week. And today my guest is Villian Report. He has basically, he protects his identity because he's actually on the ground, generally intermingling with Antifa and the Proud Boys and the different organizations that are out there involved in protests. So for that reason, he has a very good reason to conceal his identity. But he was on the ground for the We Spa protests and has a long history of doing the same at different protests, and we'll let him explain that. So I want to welcome you, Villian, to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So first question I always ask every guest is, what was the precipice moment for you that made you decide to go from just being a casual observer to actually being involved in politics or political activism?
Yeah, I don't even know if I've consciously decided to get involved in these things. I just, the George Floyd riots broke out, and I was living in Portland, Oregon. I went to a couple speeches by Joanne Hardesty, one of the city council commissioners of Portland, and she seemed to me to be directly calling for violence and riot. And sure enough, riot broke out at the end of, I believe it was May, and I went out with a camera, dressed in black bloc, just to see for myself what was going on and to document it. And then something that really disturbed me was that the mainstream media was painting a picture that was in no way matching what I was seeing on the ground. So I ended up going up to Chop to see for myself what was happening up there. And then I filmed the riots last summer in Portland almost every day. And I've just been really disturbed by what's going on and how our society is allowing this to happen. And I've been lately calling myself just an idiot with a camera. And I don't know if I'd call myself an activist or politically active. I'm disturbed by what's going on, and I'm trying to understand it, and I'm trying to create a conversation around that with other people.
Well, that's still a completely laudable goal, and I have to say I envy you for your ability to actually get on the ground. I haven't been able to do that for quite some time. Pretty much not since Occupy was I able to get down with a camera or record, interviews and such. So it's great that you're doing that. And I agree with your frustration. I kind of already sensed from the beginning at all of these protests that the message is just kind of being lost, like that this was something that really deserved for people to go investigate it in person. It reminds me of a gentleman by the name of Daniel Ellsberg, who was known for releasing the Pentagon Papers. I worked for Senator Mike Gravel, who was a senator that he involved in that process. And Daniel Ellsberg was trying to understand what was going on in Vietnam, and he finally got so frustrated with it from the Pentagon that he literally just went to Vietnam himself, ended up in the field, arming himself to protect himself, to really get a handle on what was going on, in Vietnam. And it changed his perspective and then led to the release of the Pentagon Papers. Now, while that's a war and we're talking about protests, I still think it's valid because you have like the two polar opposites of the situation, Fox News and MSNBC, both giving their own spin on everything. And it seems like the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. While I'm left leaning myself, I've found myself at, serious opposition with the activities of Antifa. I was part of Occupy, and we had Antifa back then, and that was before everybody was trying to pretend they don't exist or that they were just an idea. And they would follow around our peaceful protests and break stuff, and then we would have to do like damage control with the media to explain to them that wasn't us. And there are a lot of elements about it that nowadays people just laugh off or like they don't admit to. But Antifa was largely an anarcho-communist movement. There are some who are not, but it was kind of predominantly an anarcho-communist movement. And that was well understood. They didn't make any bones about it. And you can still see them sometimes carrying around the red and black flags of anarcho-communism. And in some cases, not even anarcho-communism. These are the ones that I would say bother me the most, is that sometimes you're also going to see the red, flag with the golden, sickle on it, hammer and sickle. And those are Stalinists or Maoists. The two founders of the Black Lives Matter are Maoists. And I didn't think I'd ever meet enthusiastic, communists from those factions, but they definitely have some pretty crazy ideas about how society should be reformed. And on the right side of the situation, you still have like what we've always had, just people, I'd say like the MAGA group, kind of, personifies its own issues. There's no question about that. And when people who are leftists kind of criticize me for being so hard on them, I point out, well, I'm not responsible for them. I'm responsible for my tribe and what my tribe is doing, and at the end of the day, as bad as this is, and I was just talking to a prominent leftist anarchist about this not long ago named Derek Jensen, was that it's come to a point where even in the left, you can get better conversations, ironically, from discussing things with the right, including Trump supporters, than you can if you're going to deviate in any way from the leftist message that is being personified by Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and the majority of what you would call the woke movements. You can't talk to those people. You either agree with everything they say, or they spit what I call the shotgun blast of oppression at you, meaning you're a racist, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, like they just throw down everything and see what sticks. And the thing that bothers me the most about this, which is because I had taken a long break from activism to concentrate on my kids, was when I was watching the Kyle Rittenhouse incident, and people were just saying stuff that just didn't happen. I was like, this didn't happen. He never just fired into the crowd. That's a lie, and then they said, like, and around the same time, Michael Reinl, murders Jay Danielson from Patriot Prayer, and they try to say that he was doing that in self-defense. And all the video I was watching was just this guy stalking up on him and shooting him. I did two different pieces about that, one of which was a long, like hour-long documentary I called the Kyle Rittenhouse incident. And my reporting on that managed to get the original first shooter that most people don't even talk about arrested. But panning out from that, the left in particular just keeps lining up on that issue and just saying things that are just factually incorrect. And if you argue with them about it, then you're a fascist, white supremacist, like, again, they get out the shotgun blast of oppression, and try to see what sticks. So I came on to watching some of your work because unknowingly, actually, I've used some clips that have you in it because of you arguing with different people at the Wii Spa. But before we get into the Wii Spa, could you talk a little bit first about your experiences at Chaz and, just the other protests that you've been involved with, or rather present for, in Portland?
Yeah, I went up to Chop from Portland, Oregon, because some people started sending me video clips of media representations and commentary about what was going on at Chop. Specifically, like one of my friends, a right-leaning friend, sent me a video clip from Tucker Carlson, and another friend, left-leaning friend, sent me a video clip from John Oliver, and they were both just saying what was going on at Chop. And I thought they were both salacious and inflammatory and just cartoonish versions of reality. So I wanted to go up there and see for myself what was going on after I saw the mainstream media skewing what I was seeing for myself in Portland. So I went to Chop. I was just planning on going in there for like a couple hours and then going home. But I ended up staying there for many days, and I got a tent. I slept in the park, and I worked in the I volunteered in the one of the commissaries, I call them, one of the little kitchens. They're like stores where they were receiving donations and giving them out to people. And I stayed there for many days, and then I left. And I'll be honest, when I was first there, I just thought the whole thing was stupid, and I was there to just kind of like mock it and make fun of it and see it for myself. But then I went back because I heard the city of Seattle was going to shut it down, and I went up there on like June 28th, I believe it was, and the city of Seattle was a no-show that day. They didn't shut it down like it was supposed to happen. But that night, there ended up being a double shooting, and two black boys, teenage boys, got shot by quote unquote Chop security. Um, a lot of people don't know that Chop is a gang territory. It's the LGBT district of town. It's also the artistic district of town, and Cal Anderson Park is a gang territory. As far as I understand, it's a Crip territory, and so there's a lot of violent things happen, mostly around young boys trying to get into the gang. And as far as I understand it, these two boys, the 14-year-old and the 16-year-old that got shot up that night, were trying to get street cred to get into the gang. They were homeless boys that run away from home, and they had left Chop and they stole somebody's vehicle, that white Jeep that you see in that circumstance. And they were trying to get back into Chop to avoid detection by the police. And so the barriers were up at that point, the concrete barriers, so it wasn't easy to just drive into Chop. So you see them driving through the ball field at one point. That's because you could get access by road to the ball field, but then you exited the ball field, and either way, you were still outside of the Chop barriers as far as the concrete boundaries go. And then they finally found the entrance on, I think it was 12th Street, and they were coming in pretty fast. These were teenage boys that just sold in the cars, so they were probably all hopped up on emotions and adrenaline. And the Chaz security shot them up. And I haven't heard any update, but the 16-year-old died on scene. He had 6 bullet wounds in him. And then the 14-year-old, he had 3 bullet wounds in him. And I held him in my lap on the back of a car that Raz Simone was driving, and we took him to the hospital. I haven't heard any update whether he's still alive or
Yeah, I haven't
not.
heard
I
anything
don't
about that
imagine.
either. Yeah, that kid like just
If he is
disappeared.
still alive, I don't imagine that he's mentally competent. He had a bullet wound to his temple, but so after that, I started filming the nightly riots in Portland for a while. I ended up getting jumped by Black Lives Matter at the Portland Police Union Hall one night. And then since
Let
then,
me
I've just
let me
trying to
pause you
film
real
all
quick
this
just so I
and
can
trying to
comment.
figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, let me comment just a little bit on like the whole Chaz-Chop police thing, because Donut Operator did a thing about that too. And they're supposed to be demonstrating how much better they are at policing than actual police, and it's pretty clear they were wandering around with AR-15s and, like doing all of the things that they claim, that police shouldn't be doing. There's a video of them harassing a guy because they thought he was wearing a pro police pin, and, they just, I think one of them hit him, if I remember right. That situation was supposed to prove their superiority as police, that people could do it better on their own. And I'd say that they kind of, epically failed at that. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, it was crazy. I've always said that the Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa, they claim that they care about the knee on George Floyd's neck, but from what I've seen, they seem to just want to be the knee on the neck. They don't want to prevent knees to be on people's necks. They just want they want to be the ones that put the knee on the neck.
So now talking about, I do want to go back to where we were at, and I apologize for interrupting. I just realized I wanted to make that point. Was just you said, okay, so then you went to Portland and started recording the daily riots, and you got jumped by BLM. So describe how that happened.
I had gotten chased out of Portland in the middle of the broad daylight on a streamer, Portland Andy. I was walking after the Oregonians for Peace event. I believe it was July 12th, I think. It was Sunday, 2020.
Right.
And after that event, me and Andy went walking around downtown, live streaming, and a group of Antifa approached us and threatened us and kind of chased us through town a little bit. And I was pretty disturbed that that was happening in broad daylight and the city wasn't doing anything about it. It's just like a gang of people dressed like ninjas or chasing people through downtown. Um, but I decided to take a break from things, but somebody talked me into dropping by the protest at the police union hall the next day. I believe it was the 13th, and I was dressed very out of the norm for going to a protest. I actually just wanted to go to the grocery store that day, so I dressed a little bit like different just so I wouldn't get noticed by anybody. But it made me stand out really bad at the police union protest. And I was filming there, and I was walking through the area, and then there's a known member of the Antifa movement in Portland called John Hacker. He's a man that's been like severely burned in some kind of fire accident, and he pointed me out to the crowd, and the crowd started surrounding me. I took off running. Somebody tripped me, and then I got beaten until they took my car keys and my cell phone, and then they let me go.
And this was just for being present, and they knew who you were because of your filming? Is
No,
that what?
no,
Go
they had
ahead.
no clue who I was. They had no clue who I was. It was just I had a camera, and John Hacker was pointing me out. People will, if he points somebody out at a protest, people will take his word and start surrounding them. He was accusing me of
Oh,
filming people's faces.
okay. So it was because of the filming. I guess I had missed that part.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I get it. And they are becoming particular about that. But I think in large part it's because of the fact that it hasn't been working out for them. So like that reminds me, like Drew Hernandez, for example, has figured out ways. I guess he's got some kind of hidden camera technology or something, but he's gotten some pretty clear footage of bad things going on in Portland, like the infamous incident where that guy got kicked in the head.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is The Intercept did kind of a hit job on him and some of the other activist journalists, and like claimed that like that was taken out of context, or that like the whole incident was apparently not as bad as they thought. It was just some kind of personal thing or whatever. But so in response to that, Drew Hernandez released his full, like I think it's like 30 to 40 minutes long video, and it certainly didn't make Black Lives Matter look any better, because it showed that that particular group of Black Lives Matter security, and I put that in quotes, was just wandering around Portland looking for random white people to beat up, and repeatedly saying, "We're here for Black Lives Matter. Fuck these white people." So it's like basically Drew was like, "Okay, sure, here, have both barrels." And don't get me wrong, politically, Drew Hernandez and I probably do not agree on a lot of things, but in some cases, because I've been around what happens when people are in a mob, you don't necessarily have to make up too much in order to get some kind of point across. They screw up on their own. And I think the fact that nobody knew that Drew was videotaping them makes his videotaping much more, authentic in the long run, because that's what they do when they don't think they're being watched. And I know that they don't represent all of the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is a constant, problem that I have is that they say that, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. But you guys are also like dead silent when this stuff happens. You never condemn it. You don't speak out against it. You certainly don't try to stop it while it's happening. And you're constantly telling us, your silence is violence. But if anybody from Black Lives Matter does anything like that, it's just invisible. And if you bring it up, it's because you're right wing, here comes the shotgun of oppression again. You must be all of these things. You're a white supremacist. That's why you brought that up. Were you in Portland when all of that was going on, or
Yeah, it was.
hmm, were you present for any of that, or?
The attack on the Anaheim.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't out that night.
Okay.
But I was pretty disturbed by that. I gathered a lot of like different internet sources and put out a lot of info on Quiche Love to kind of help that situation to be pursued. Um, I don't usually try to use my footage to pursue people for criminal charges, but like when somebody is like blatantly just hunting somebody in the head in the middle of the street.
He's lucky
That's
he didn't kill
something
him.
that,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
He's lucky he
I
didn't
don't know
kill
why
him.
I don't know why Marquise Love isn't in jail for decades. Like our like our judicial system is so strange. Like some places in the U.S., like people are still in jail for decades for marijuana issues, but
Right.
then like something like that where I don't believe Marquise Love got like a severe sentence for that, but like if you kick somebody in the head, like you've seen the video, like he was
Yeah.
trying to kill a man. Like he
Right.
should be in jail for a long time, if not life. Like
And that same night, he like put out tweets like he was the victim of the situation and said things like, I might go to jail for life because I fought a racist, and there's no indication whatsoever that that man was racist. He was like this really mild mannered guy who was just trying to help the trans woman that they were all beating up and robbing, and then just try to get the hell out of there. And then they accused him of trying to run people over, even though it's very clear that he didn't do that at all. He didn't accelerate his vehicle until everybody was out of his way. But they lie about that. That's another one that there's so many different versions of that get passed around that they just don't want to talk about. And then because of that happened, like right, I want to say within a couple weeks of the Kyle Rittenhouse incident, it just got forgotten. Nobody talked about it anymore. Were you in
yeah,
Portland when Michael Reinl murdered Jay Danielson, or were you around at that time?
I was in Portland. I was in Portland, but I didn't go out that night. Um, I've been swinging back and forth on being involved in this kind of thing and stepping away from it. And I couldn't. Nobody really thought that that was going to be like a significant event that night. It was just supposed to be like a Trump car parade,
Right.
and it didn't seem like something interesting to me to film. It just seemed like a bunch of people like waving flags and driving around. But I did not know that Antifa was going to stop their parade, and when I didn't know they were going to try to drive through downtown. I think that was a last minute choice. But
Right.
uh,
Well, yeah, that's do you? I guess like I'm sure you've seen a lot of the footage, but one of the parts in particular that bothered me was this really heavyweight, as in just like a large girl, basically going up and saying, we killed a fucking Nazi. I am not sad that a fucking fascist died tonight. And the whole Michael Reinhold thing was kind of an interesting moment because one of the things that was constantly going on the internet at that time was that they would always share this link that said that studies show 0 people have been killed by Antifa. And I got to watch how they tried to like dance between everybody's Antifa to, well, he wasn't Antifa, even though like, on his own social media, he called himself 100% Antifa. So they were trying to do all of this damage control about this, and when you review the video footage and like every piece of information I could get my hands on when I did my little mini doc about it, it's really clear that he was just stalking around looking for somebody to kill, and somebody
yeah,
pointed out that there's a car, I guess, in Portland, like a black kind of sports car, and it frequently has people of Antifa in it. And that car just somehow kind of magically appeared right after they shot this guy, like within seconds, and people got out of that car and like tried to give Jay Danielson medical help and all that, and it just, the whole thing kind of felt, it's like, I don't know how deep it goes. I don't have evidence, but it really did kind of feel like an organized effort of we're going to go find somebody and execute them. Because the Trump supporters, I guess they, from their trucks, like were spraying bear mace at people and stuff like that. I saw some of that. So it's not to say that the right didn't do anything at that point, but it kind of falls back in the fact
I
that,
don't know about that. I don't know
no, go
about that.
ahead.
You're holding that against the some Trump supporters. I wasn't there for that event, but all the videos I've shown, they were spraying people that were blocking their vehicles and also hitting their vehicles. I did not see any video of Trump supporter vehicles just randomly spraying people while they're driving. They were
No,
spraying
I'm
people
willing
that
to
were
believe that.
blocking
I'm
their
willing to
path.
believe that.
So
Yeah,
I didn't
that sounds reasonable
no,
too.
and don't get me wrong, I've seen the right act super horrible. Specifically, we saw last weekend. But many times I've seen the right just just do stupid things. But I did not see one instance of video where the right was just randomly spraying people. They were spraying people that were blocking the street and not allowing their car to go by, and they were spraying people that were attacking their vehicles.
No, I'm willing to accept that. I'm just going off what I saw, but that's the reason. One of the reasons I have you on is you have been around on the ground there, and I have not. So I'll defer to you on that when it comes up for sure. But that one was a big black eye because it completely destroyed the idea that supposedly they don't kill people. And I think really that what it comes down to is the reason they don't kill people is they can't get away with it. And the other thing about that I found difficult to deal with was when I was doing my investigation was that the media would put out articles saying, witness says that the police executed Michael Reinhold and that he wasn't armed. And they selectively would put that up and they would say that, well, there was one witness who said this. And then what they don't reveal and what I found out, and I have video of them talking, is there were 3 other witnesses who said, no, he had a rifle and he fired it at the police. But they don't talk about that. They just kind of selectively omit the fact that more witnesses said that he was armed than the one guy who said he was not. They also don't usually bring up the details that the witness that was on Reinhold's side of the situation also happened to be his friend who he was staying with at the time, saying he just had a gummy worm in his mouth or something. But that comes back to why this is also frustrating is that, people, they don't have any way of looking at both sides of the footage because Antifa has their motives for, editing things the way they want. Black Lives Matter does, but in the same token, you could assume the right wing would as well. You're trying to find the truth of the situation, so I guess moving on, is there anything else that happened in your time, reporting on Portland that you'd want to share before we move forward with the WeSpa?
Well, one thing I wanted to say about the Michael Reinhold shooting, possibly execution, was that there were several local police agencies and federal agencies, like the U.S. Marshals, were involved in that. And it really disturbed me that the best of the best of our law enforcement forces of the U.S. Couldn't bring this man in alive and make him face trials so that we could see discovery and see the trial and see the details of what happened. And it was basically like a street execution. Don't get me wrong, that guy was a cold-blooded street murderer, and I've got no tears shedding that he got killed. But for law and justice, to where we're going to move away from just barbarism and that kind of thing, it really disturbed me that the U.S. government couldn't bring this guy in. They killed him in the process on the streets. They couldn't. Vice News was able to contact this guy and get an interview with him.
Right.
They're just a news agency. They were able to contact him and sit down and have a calm conversation on video. And the U.S. government wasn't able to even achieve that level of detainment of him, to where the only way they were able to interact with him was to kill him. That was disturbing.
Yeah, and I'm open to the possibility that something could have went down there negatively, but the problem is after the guy had already shot someone, I'm also open to the possibility that he would fire on police if they caught up to him. So it's hard to say, and unfortunately, I honestly that's another example of a situation that makes me feel that all law enforcement should have body cams, period. It is just, this is what you do. This is they as standard as your badge and your gun.
They couldn't have waited till he walked into a grocery store or walked into some kind of business. They couldn't have waited until he was in a situation to where he could have just been overwhelmed by the physical force of men before he had to. It disturbs me that their multi-agency pursuit of him ended in gunfire. There was that's the best our government forces can do. Gunfire in the street. That was disturbing.
That kind of reminds me of what went on with David Koresh at the Waco site, and David Koresh pointed that out himself. And don't get me wrong, I'm fairly confident David Koresh was a weirdo, but he's why didn't you guys just pick me up when I was jogging every day? He's why are you here? Trying to cause this problem at this compound. So I definitely, I'm open to the possibility that there was foul play. They're just, when I reported on it, I said there's 3 witnesses that say this, there's 1 witness that says that. Unfortunately, that's why I come back to just anybody enforcing, honestly, I would say any kind of state authority
should have a camera. Like it should just be as standard as their badge and their gun, because we always run into these situations, and it's not just to protect the people; it's to protect the police officers. Because one of the other things that Drew Hernandez says in his analysis of the way that Antifa operates, for example, and now the right wing starting to do it too, is that that they have like a method of we're going to cause some problems. We're going to get the police to declare an unlawful assembly. Okay, now they've done that, so now the police are going to move on us. We're going to start recording, and we're going to record any time the police hit any one of us, and then we're going to put up the clip of that, and then we're going to change the narrative to we're the peaceful protesters who got attacked by the cops. And I basically, when it came to the We Spot thing, this might be a good segue. I was like, well, yeah, it's exactly what just happened. Is like I watched the footage of them basically antagonizing the police. Shortly thereafterwards, the police declare an unlawful assembly, and then they move on Antifa, and some of them get clubbed. And that's the only clips that we see, is some of them getting clubbed, unless you look really hard. And so, it's very frustrating to me that, again, because of this, they can kind of control, the narrative. When we were talking, off the air before this broadcast, I brought up one of my old videos of when they attacked the Columbus statue, and the video footage that was getting shared everywhere, was like a bunch of cops standing in front of the statue, having things thrown at them and being screamed at. When you look at the aerial view of the situation, you watch that a group of Black Bloc moving in formation came up together out of a group of hundreds of Black Lives Matter protesters, and that they had weapons, that they were, they had a plan, they were moving together. Like, there's no way these people did not meet ahead of time, with a plan and a strategy for how they were going to execute this. This wasn't just an organic group of people who said, oh, we're all wearing black, let's go do something together. And then when you look at the aerial view, you see very clearly that all the weapons and stuff being thrown at the cops were coming out of the Black Bloc formation, and that there were hundreds of protesters that were just standing there who weren't participating in that, and that it skews our understanding of everything, as far as what's going on, in the same way that, we keep circulating the same, police shooting videos over and over again to try to change the consciousness of people to think that this is just an epidemic, that this apparently happens just constantly, when the truth is that, like, I picked up the numbers, and like only 269 Black people were killed by cops in 2019, that on average about 1,000 people are shot by police a year out of millions of police interactions. And of course, everybody wants that number to be as close to zero as possible. But, if you followed the narrative, you would think that this is just happening every day, and they use words like genocide to describe it. When it's really actually like you're more likely to drown in a swimming pool, die in a house fire, die in childbirth than you are any ever being shot by a cop. But to get back to, what's going on with Antifa and what went on at the We Spa, I guess I would start with, I know you said you weren't there in the third. I'd like to eventually try to get somebody who witnessed it, but there's so much footage on the third of them just walking up to protesters who don't, a lot of these people they're not Proud Boys, they're not like militant protesters. Like, there was a couple of Hispanic people, like as in a couple, who were just walking along with a sign, and Antifa just ran up to them, took their sign, and started shoving them around with skateboards and stuff, and then chased them off. And then there were some of those crazy Christian nut jobs who, were really homophobic. And I don't like those people, but, again, they got, attacked. Like, none of them made any aggressive moves, so it seemed like on the third, they just kind of owned the place. And like, I've got footage of people walking to the cops, like, can you help us? And the cops are just saying, just stay away from there. And, like, as in they weren't going to do anything about it. And that led to a lot of frustration. I think it also at that point, incited people like the Proud Boys and more militant right-wing types to show up. It's just like in Kenosha, the reason they all showed up was because the cops were ordered to stand down and just let Antifa and Black Lives Matter just burn the city down, and nobody would do anything. So I guess I want to pull you back into this then, is that, you show up. Did you have a comment first about anything about what went on the third?
I recently met a live streamer from LA that's a pretty good guy, and he got attacked on the third. He live streams by the YouTube channel WYSIWYG, and
Right.
And he's a pretty peaceful guy and like reaches out to a lot of people. He's not like far right. He's not a leftist, and they attacked him pretty badly just for streaming there.
Right, that seems to be the new modus operandi. Like you don't even have to do anything to them. It's just you're streaming and you're not them. Like they want full
Yeah.
control over who's filming, and as I heard
Yeah,
from,
like
unfortunately,
on the
go ahead.
17th, they were surrounding me, and I was accusing them of being fascist, and I was like, yeah, I saw your flyers telling people not to stream here, and then they say like, oh, so then you're aware, as though they had some authority to put upon me, like as though like my knowledge of them claiming that there's no streaming happened put more guilt on me to the fact that I was streaming, like as though they had some right or authority to like declare no streaming. And once I knew that they were declaring no streaming, I was all the more guilty. And it's ludicrous.
Like they can just write a law. Like,
Yeah,
what you were doing
yeah.
was suddenly illegal because they said so.
And because I'm
Right.
aware that they said so, like in their eyes, I'm more culpable because like I knew the law they laid down and I'm disobeying it. So I'm breaking their Antifa law.
That's something I see. Charlie Veach, he's a British streamer and was like a really deeply involved activist. Some years ago, he mellowed out a bit when he had kids, but he's constantly in a situation where people are telling him to stop filming, and he's like, "Nope, you can't stop me," because he knows the laws in England where he's allowed to film and where he doesn't. And
Yeah.
but when it comes down to that, it's just might makes right. Like there's, and on the third, all the footage I see, there's like, I don't know, 20 to 30 Antifa, usually beating up one or two people at a time, and then none of these people are hitting back, one of them just looked like a journalist who had somewhat darker skin and black hair. They punched him in the head like 3 times. They try to tell him, get the camera, like they're going to take his stuff, and that I think beyond anything else, like supposedly there's a member of Antifa who's also a trans person who's I guess also a musician known as Precious Child, who I guess was supposedly the organizer who got everybody involved with going to the Wii Spa, and there's footage of them being there, dressed in black. Somebody had identified them and participated in it, and they were all really happy with the outcome of the third, and then, when the next dates came up, and I guess those are the days when you were there, and things didn't go quite as well for them. All of a sudden, they were all posting on Twitter how depressed they were, and oh man, the society, like, the police are standing up for fascism. That's what the SoCal Antifa Twitter said, like it definitely demoralized them that all of a sudden they weren't just running the streets, so I guess, now that we're here to the Wii Spa situation and you were there for all of that, take the mic for a moment, I guess, and give me your understanding chronologically of like what you experienced while you were there.
So I got there early at like 9 or 10 or so, and I noticed they had attacked the neighborhood around that area the night before and graffitied everything, even like a housing complex. And noticed that there was 50 to 100 black bloc people there to start out, and they were taking over. The LAPD was being very strange in their actions towards this event. They tried to cordon off the area in front of the Wii Spa, that corner, as a police spot. To the east of that, they at the housing authority building, they claimed that that was off limits to people and that that was the police line as well. To the corner opposite of the police corner, they said that that was a press for a media safety zone, and the corner adjacent to the media zone and the police corner was an activist zone for Antifa. And they also claim that they were trying to give a space for Antifa, and the left and the right, to protest separately, which is not true. So the first thing is that they weren't mediating any of these zones that they were arbitrarily trying to force. Like at a protest, like it's ludicrous for the city to say like you stand in this box and you stand in that box and you stand in that box. It's just utterly ludicrous. But at the same time, they were telling all the people that were filming to go to this one corner, which was occupied by a whole bunch of Black Bloc Antifa members. So like individual streamers, independent, right-wing, anybody who was non-Antifa, the police were telling them to go to the corner and stand alone in the middle of Antifa. And it was just ludicrous. And they didn't create a space for the right wing and the left wing to protest equally. The right wing showed up an hour or two after the left wing started protesting, and the police stopped them a block away from the Wispa. But they allowed Antifa to protest all around the Wispa. What really, really disturbed me is I have on my stream many times that the Antifa was committing micro assaults and crimes, minor assaults and crimes, like they were shoving people, they were surrounding people and threatening them and giving them death threats, and they were slapping people's cameras and that sort of thing, like brandishing like knives or mace and that kind of thing. There were dozens of police officers that this was all happening in front of. And I approached police officers many times and I was like, what is your guys' policy? What is going on here? You guys are seeing crimes committed and you're just watching it. And my perception was that repeatedly the LAPD was targeting the small minority of conservatives or centrists that were filming or just there present, and they were escorting them out of the crowd, saying that for your safety you can't be here. And like even me, several times they were telling me, they were threatening me to for citations of being in the crosswalk of a closed down road, which several half a dozen at least police were standing in that road. But because I'm also standing in that closed road, somehow I'm at risk of a citation. The captain told me several times to go stand in the media corner, which was an Antifa corner. There was just a crowd of Antifa. I even questioned him once. I was like, is this order for me or is this order for the crowd that I'm around? Because you're talking specifically to me, but if I'm breaking some kind of rule, the whole crowd around me is breaking that kind of rule. Why are you focused on me? He wouldn't answer. I was very, very disturbed by the actions of LAPD, just as I've been disturbed by actions of Portland police and lesser, but also Seattle police, that I've seen these situations happen where the police are not pursuing justice in these situations. They're not pursuing to hold people accountable for crimes they're committing. They're not pursuing who's right and who's wrong. They are pursuing the path of least resistance, and they're trying to avoid conflict, which is not the role of law enforcement, to just avoid conflict and allow criminals to do what they want to do without escalating the situation. No, the police need to go in there and apply the law equally to everyone. If somebody's breaking the law, if somebody's committing assault, if somebody's threatening people verbally in public with threats of violence or death, the police need to step in. And they're scared of the PR, and I understand that the police have had bad PR for at least a decade now, but that's not going to happen by them pussyfooting around and avoiding conflict. They need to just apply the law equally. They can wear body cams on every one of them, and we can go through the courts and see, like, yes, this was a proper use of force, this was not a proper use of force, and it's just driving me nuts to see the police just turn a blind eye. Dozens of police officers are watching while people are getting assaulted, and they just stand there. And then they target the non-Antifa press and people present as though their presence was the problem. I think the way the police see it is that this large mob comes out and that they'll do nothing if there's nobody there to watch them. So when right-wing groups or press or centrist press or anybody comes out to observe what Antifa is doing, their vandalism, their intimidation, the police target those people that are showing what's happening as the problem, as though if they never came out and showed what's happening, if they never came out and said no to Antifa, then Antifa would just fizzle out, which I think is ludicrous. Like, even if that were true, still, the police are targeting the observers of the crimes and not the criminals that are committing the crimes.
Well, there's a possibility, to kind of add on to the anti-police side of it would be that, they may have a motive to try to control what kind of video gets out too. Like, I mean, at that point, because they have their own cameras. I noticed that they're starting to use cameras again. Back in 2008, like the Patriot Act era, we noticed that, during Occupy, they'd film everybody, and it was like they were trying to get profiles of who all the organizers were, maybe to be used later. And I think, what bothers me the most about all of this, and I've said this openly, and it's the funny thing is that you get called a right winger for saying this stuff, but there's a prominent leftist named Chris Hedges who's been saying this for a long time. Is that what all the violence that they're engaged in is just creating an anti, leftist sentiment, and it's actually making it harder for the left to make any headway. And the Black Lives Matter stuff. If you're concerned about, the fact that people profile you as a violent criminal, going out and being a violent criminal is not really the best way to solve that issue. That's something Martin Luther King understood clearly. And when you watch, like, there was a recent peaceful protest in Canada about like a homeless tent city, and I haven't been able to investigate the tent city too heavily, but they were doing some old school, like, civil disobedience, lock arms stuff. And it made the cops look really bad because the cops were just pushing these people down. We're not fighting them at all, and it seems like that's gone. It's like there's an effort now to try to tell everybody that violent protest is the only thing that works. They say stuff like, they try to say, well, Martin Luther King was in support of violence near the end. And I'm like, no, I've never heard that. I think you're making that up. Yeah. And there's actually statistics. A guy named Ryan Chapman has a really good YouTube channel, and he's very good at just giving information and not being partisan. And he pointed out that studies show that peaceful protests work about 50% of the time, and violent protests only work about 25% of the time. But there seems to be an effort to try to push violence as the strategy, and it's not working. Like, that's one of the things I said in one of my videos, reviewing the WeSpa stuff, was because one of the things that came out is that another woman came forward with her story, and she put it on YouTube, and then she put it on, I think it's the Daily Mail. She was interviewed, and she told her story that she went into WeSpa like back in January, and, she had her daughter with her, and she described 3 people who came in, 2 of which she described as like, looked kind of like lesbians, colored hair, tattoos, and they had a guy with them who had like 5 o'clock shadow and a beard, who wasn't making any effort to look like a woman. And they just came in and sat in the hot tub with a nude 6-year-old girl, and a bunch of nude women. And when they asked him to cover up, he refused. And, like, they were just there specifically to try to cause an incident. Like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? And then months later, then we have them just, apparently there was another incident. And what's going on right now, I notice on the internet, is they're pointing fingers at each other. Like, was it the right wing who staged this incident? Was it the left wing who staged this incident? But the point that I tend to make, and I'd like your view on this as well, is that it doesn't even matter if it was a hoax, because you have so many people that are just defending it anyway. Like, that even if it wasn't a hoax, that they think it should just be acceptable. That's actually like probably one of the most quintessential parts, was watching you arguing with the heavy lady, who said she identified as a woman and as a trans and as a non-binary, that she's standing there telling you, that, well, if I'm a trans person, then I have a right to feel safe. So, if I go into a place and that's what makes me feel safe, then that's fine. And unfortunately, she was shouting so hard, it was hard to hear you, but I believe you kind of said, well, women don't feel safe around, penises or something to that effect. Maybe you could clarify, because I couldn't hear most of what you were saying because of the stupid crowd.
Yeah, I was trying to make the point of, like, whether or not her anecdotal evidence shows one thing. It's my experience that many, many, many women and girls don't feel comfortable in their private places getting undressed and being vulnerable with male genitalia present. And she wouldn't address that. But and that whole crowd is just, like, often so selfish. It just well, I have the right to feel safe. Like, okay, all right, but don't other people that are around you also have the right to feel safe? Like,
right.
If some person felt like they needed to have like a bazooka strapped to their back to feel safe, like, and then they like walk into like a mall and like nobody else feels safe because he's walking around with a bazooka strapped to his back. Like our rights are valid until they interfere with somebody else's rights. Like if you have a right to safety, so do the other people around you, and we have to negotiate those things.
Right, and that's that was the kind of the comment I made in that video, was that I said this is when the left starts to eat its own tail, when they do things like, well, I have a right to feel safe, even if that makes everybody around me not feel safe. That's secondary, and it's also like a woman's rights issue, and I encounter that quite a bit when I'm debating the issue of trans women in sports. I have a daughter who was a very elite wrestler, and so as a result, wrestling is forced to be co-ed most of the time because there's not enough girl wrestlers to make girls to divisions all the time. When there are girls divisions, it's usually for special events like state championships or national championships. It's becoming more common as more girls join the sport. But like as a result, I have like upfront direct experience with what co-ed wrestling looks like, and they basically just say, well, none of that matters. We need to let this person feel included. They may commit suicide, if we don't let them play sports, and that's that whole attitude about it. I'm like, guys, we haven't even finished the fight for women's rights in sports, and so, but now the cis women in the situation are invisible. They're erased, and it's the same scenario. Well, that's what was coming to my mind when you were arguing with her. Like she kind of follows you as you start walking away from her. She's like, basically it's like the women in the situation no longer exist. Well, except for her, of course, because she identifies as a woman and as a trans and as a non-binary. I couldn't even, I literally like cussed. I couldn't help myself. I was like, what the fuck? Because what she said just didn't make any sense. But it's like, you're correct about the selfish thing. And that's something that I have encountered a lot, particularly in the anarchist community. And unfortunately, even some anarchists are starting to recognize that this is a problem, is that these kinds of movements frequently attract personalities who are not people you would want as your neighbors if you were living in anarchist society, because they, like I remember, Christopher Cantwell, for example, he was a ardent, free market, libertarian, right-wing anarcho-capitalist, and then he evolved into becoming a white nationalist skinhead. It was present at Charlottesville, and when I debated him, he was just a nasty, this is before he became a white nationalist, he was cussing at me and just trying to shout me down and bully me. That was his way of doing things. And then, there have been other anarchists over the years that I've encountered that just have some crazy ideas, and, that's actually what got Derek Jensen, who used to be a really prominent leftist anarchist, thinker. He's got like a bunch of books he's written and all that. They, a bunch of anarchists kind of excommunicated him because he said that there should still be laws against rape. Like, how the hell, do you find yourself in that situation? And, that's a lot of these people also, it just seems like they don't have any kind of scope or maturity beyond what makes them feel good in the moment, and the long-term consequences of what they're suggesting are just not there, so I guess, what has been in your experience then, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the philosophy of it, and what are your takes on it, having interacted with and talked to more of these people on the ground?
Can you narrow that down? That's like a pretty broad question.
Sure. I guess it's just given what I've said and what you've experienced, what are your thoughts about the mindset of these people and how it, basically how it comes about? How do you get to that point where you think that that's the way to talk and the way to behave, and that this is a rational thing worth fighting for?
Well, I think one thing is I was a bleeding heart liberal. I grew up with a single mom. I think that the lack of a father causes that kind of thing, because traditionally the father provides and he works hard and provides subsistence for the family. Mm-hmm. And when people don't have, the welfare state rises up and people don't have a direct contact to the work and production of the needs that they're supplied with, excuse me, I'm hiccuping. They kind of lose touch with reality, and they start like dreaming about these utopias, and just focusing on why the world is not a utopia, rather than why it's so difficult to create things. But I think a lot of these people have no connection with how hard it is to just provide a nice life for yourself. And they just see that as a base standard that should be guaranteed for them. Um,
That
I
makes
don't
a
know.
lot of sense.
I interviewed a lot of people at the when I was first um, filming the riots. A lot of people would allow me to talk to them and question their life, and most of them grew up in really bad families or without fathers, and I just think that without a need to occupy your time with providing subsistence to yourself and those around you, if you're being given welfare subsidies or you're given free college loans that are going to destroy you down the line with no need to have any collateral for them up front, you just coast through life, and you don't really have any sense of what it takes to be happy and to be comfortable and have your needs met. So um, I don't know. I
Well,
think
that kind
they're
of meets
spoiled
up with
children.
right. That kind of meets up with something I've said to people before is like when I say I don't hate communists, it's because I've met some peaceful communists, but a real functioning communism, like because there's a good commune called Twin Oaks. I think it's in Virginia, but like they have regular meetings of okay, so here's the jobs we need to do. Who's doing these jobs? And it's hard work. And that's something that a lot of the '60s, communist communes failed because they think that they're just going to go somewhere and it's going to be easy. But to be a successful socialist and communist is a lot of work. And in Twin Oaks, if you can't do the work and if you can't be useful, you just don't get to stay. They're not going to gulag you or anything, but I think that these people think that what's going to happen is that if they get their communist world, that they're just going to get to collect checks and do whatever they want all the time, and that's not how it works. It
Yeah.
takes, it basically means somebody's still doing all that work. It doesn't just magically go away. And I think they're in for a rude awakening. Is that I still believe in things like the more practical sense of those things would be like worker co-ops where the people who are in the company have a vested interest in it, and they decide things democratically as much as possible. Like Mondragon is a major corporation that does that, but everybody there is working. And if you're not working, then the rest of the people in that collective all look at you like, hey, we got to get back to work. So I think that they're going to be in for a rude awakening if they believe that that's how the things just function. And it's funny is like going back to the Chaz-Chop for a second, is that was supposed to be their demonstration that they don't need the state, yet they were totally dependent on money and food and supplies from outside of their little commune. Is that correct? I mean, that's what was reported, but
Yeah,
I'd rather
I
ask
was just
you.
going to bring that up too, because one of the things I saw really disturbing in CHOP is, as I said, I was volunteering in one of the grocery store, like one of the commissary places, and people were just bringing truckloads of donations. Like you had somebody at the counter like all day long just accepting donations that people bring in, like camping gear, food, like anything these people tweeted out that they needed, like it would shortly show up and somebody would bring it, like industrial style kitchen gear, shelving, anything. And I had not just once, but a few times, like there were some idealistic like young people there that were saying things along the lines of like, see, society doesn't have to work the way that they say it has to. We don't have to go to work all the time, and like all our needs are met here and everything. And like it just shocked me because like these people had no sense of where this all was coming from, and that somebody else was working and donating and providing, and they just had this like ludicrous version of reality, and they thought it was sustainable. They thought that they were just going to be able to hang out all day, volunteer an hour or two at the commissary, sleep in their tent, and get all their food and hygiene needs met, and that was just going to keep going on into the future. Like they were so disconnected from how the world works in reality. and it wasn't just a one-off thing. I saw several people making comments like this, and it blew my mind. It's like, you have never had to pay bills before. I can see that you have never had to pay bills
Right,
before.
right, right. That's, and that comes back to something you and I talked about like earlier, was that they also have an inflated idea of how powerful they are, like militarily or,
Yeah.
confrontationally. I said this when I was on Johnny Walker Dread's show. I was like, you encounter these people and they think they're fighting the police, like they won some kind of military battle when they took over the Chaz-Chop area. And the truth is the cops left because they didn't want to kill them. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, and
The cops left because they were ordered by the city to leave.
Right.
The Chop anarchist zone did not overcome the cops in the least bit. They were ordered to leave.
Right. And what I was getting at was just say whoever gave that order just didn't want to see. I mean, it's like if they were doing that in China, they'd have just been shot. That's you can't get away with like attacking federal buildings in these absolutist countries. And that's why It's funny is that there are actually provisions in the Patriot Act that would have allowed Trump to declare all of them domestic terrorists. And as soon as that happens, there's all kinds of bad provisions in that like, take away a lot of your rights. And he didn't do any of that. And I'm not a Trump supporter, but the point is that if he was this big fascist, you'd see a lot more than just federal officers. There would have been a huge crackdown. The military would have been involved. It's the same thing about comments like saying that you live in a police state. If you lived in a police state, you wouldn't be protesting at all. Like there wouldn't be any of that. They put that down pretty quick. And I'm not saying that the police, don't make mistakes. They certainly do. I think what bothers me though is that's why I said earlier is that there's this effort being made to just recirculate the same bad cop stories. There's no effort made to circulate stories that help people understand why these things happen, which is the reason why I send my viewers to a YouTube channel called Police Activity, because the guy goes through very carefully and meticulously, puts together all the footage he can get from multiple angles, whether it's cell phones, police body cams, and he puts the bad shootings on his channel along with the legitimate shootings, and you really see like the version of reality that they want out there is that supposedly we don't need cops. Cops are bad. Cops kill more people than anyone else. Like that. This is all just like fiction. Like and they usually have no grasp of what crime looks like. That's the part of their equation that doesn't ever seem to get mentioned. Is like they'll be like, well, cops are killing people, so we should get rid of cops. So then when we have no cops, it's like nobody will die. And as the criminals somehow are this element that don't get brought up in their equation, in their math. They just act like criminals don't exist, and they think if they just put up, more social welfare programs, that criminals are just all going to go get 9-to-5 jobs. And I do feel that poverty is linked to crime, but I don't think that it's just going to poof, go away. And even the more sensible anarchists understand that that's not how it can work. But I think that what I typically encounter, I had a friend also who shared his experiences because he's a black man who was going to these protests and just kind of listening to people, is that you have people who don't know what crime looks like saying abolish the police, who've probably never lived in a neighborhood where there was gunshots, who've probably never been shot at, robbed, stabbed, or any of that. All they know is I don't like getting parking tickets, or, I got arrested once for weed. And that's the extent of their belief that this is what the cops are. And then criminals. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I knew many of the people there were lifelong criminals. And of course they want to abolish the police. So there's an ignorance in place, and they think that all the authoritarian behavior comes from police alone. And I'm like, in my neighborhood, the police response time could be as long as 2 hours. The authoritarians were still there. Like somebody's going to take the authority, and you don't want gangs ruling you. They don't follow any rules. None. Like there's no filter whatsoever. Especially since you pointed out that Chaz-Chop, like the crime rates went up, and I've heard that that's exaggerated. I've heard that it's accurate. Would you say that crime went up in that area during that time period?
Well, I think crime was already going up in that area because Seattle made some policy decisions to allow kind of the hands off on drug dealers and like vagrants, and allowing questionable people to just roam the public city spaces without being subject to the law for minor crimes. People for at least a decade were allowed to just walk around publicly high as a kite, and Seattle kind of put a hands off on that. So, and I talked to a lot of residents of the Seattle area, and they all said the same kind of thing, that the city had been going to seed for quite a while because they had made policies to allow people to just be vagrant in city parks, and to give the city parks over to that sort of thing.
Yeah, those policies all come up out of this idea that, well, if we let cops handle these things, and sometimes people get killed, and the numbers just don't add up. Like, yes, okay, sometimes cops make mistakes. All systems involving humans does this, whether it's firemen who, through mistakes, accidentally get people killed, or surgeons, or, so instead we should just turn off the police. They're the only thing between us and the people who are going to continue to commit crimes. They make claims like that police don't solve crimes, and I pulled up the statistics even from a left-leaning website that said that they only solve about 60% of murders. And I'm like, okay, would you rather it was 100% of murders that are not solved? Like, do you think that murder just stops? Like, it just, it comes back to just them just not grasping what they're discussing. I have a friend who has family who are from Somalia, where there's no police. It's just different warlords, running everything. And that's a place where you see children walking around with rocket launchers and AK-47s, because that's just what you do in Somalia, and you can't seem to penetrate to these kids' heads. And it kind of unfortunately puts you in a situation where you're like, man, maybe you just need to let them do it. So, because it does not seem like they're going to learn any other way, short of them going there and doing it. Like, some of these people in particular who think that we're better off without police, it's like, I wish I could take them to the neighborhood I grew up in, because, it'd be pretty apparent to you probably within 3 hours that you need police in that neighborhood. But regardless, to get back to like one of the things specifically, there's the reason I wanted to talk to you, is that to discuss, what goes on at these protests, and, also discuss like, what the right wing does, that's questionable, in these situations. I mean, on the 3rd at the Wii Spa, like I said, it just didn't seem like there was any of the tough types that were there. But I remember watching a broadcast where you were being interviewed, and like some jackass from the right wearing like football pads was walking around like just macing everybody. And you said it was a chemical that was like worse than bear mace.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. Like I hope that I'm not just a wuss. Like, I feel like I have a pretty high pain tolerance. I've been bear maced before, but this was excruciatingly painful. Like, it just felt like every spot of my skin that had been touched by that substance was just, it felt like I was literally on fire. It was horrible. I almost called 911 from the shower trying to wash it out.
And he was just kind of like shooting people. You said he shot like, some small girl, like, who was she was just a
coward. He had it attached to his waist, and he was just walking up and sneaking up on people and like spraying from his waist, and like nobody had any warning. He sprayed multiple people. And what really bothered me is that this isn't something that you just don't see happening in that crowd. Like, there's something that happens, you see, but none of that crowd, as far as I saw, ever approached him or ever questioned him or told him to stop, or nobody ever stood up to him. Nobody did.
When I saw that footage, I was like, God, I'm so glad I'm in a wheelchair, because I'd have taken a baseball bat to that guy's kneecap. Like, he was begging for it. And he had, even like with his face mask, you could see he had like this smirk on his face. Like, he was enjoying it. Like he thought he was playing like Grand Theft Auto or something, just randomly targeting people. But I mean, I guess, what have your experiences been during the times when you find yourself intermingled with the right?
Well, there have been many times where the right is very suspicious of who's in there, and I wear a mask to keep my identity hidden. And so later that day on the 17th, I went up to Riverside, California, and I filmed a political speech event there. And I talked to a couple people. I remember one guy came up to me and another person standing up to me beside me, and he's like, "Why are you guys wearing masks?" And he was mad about the COVID thing. He thought it was just stupid. He was like trying to cost us for that. And I tried to tell him about doxing, and strangely, he had never heard about doxing. He didn't know what it was. And then another lady I spoken to, I was interviewing her, and all of a sudden she's like, she said something, and, unless you're on the left, and F you, and he starts going off on me and just walked off. She ended up sending me she found me on social media later and sent me a DM, and she apologized for it. But I didn't really accept her apology. I doubled down and asked her some questions because I felt like she was apologizing because she had looked into who I was and thought that I was on her side, and she was sorry for acting that way. And I asked her, I was like, no, I'm not accepting that. If you're just apologizing because you found out that I'm on your side, then like that's not an apology. If you're apologizing for your behavior because you shouldn't be speaking to people that way, regardless of who they are, then I accept that apology. Like what? And she didn't reply to me. But the right's getting more and more suspicious and paranoid, and there's reasons for that. Like I have seen political bias prosecution. I see law enforcement in different cities choosing to turn their head away from leftist things, but then arrest the right-wing people, or 200 plus days of rioting in Portland and other cities across the country, and not much was done about that. But then a day at the Capitol event where over 1 million people showed up to the Capitol, and maybe dozens, if not like maybe up to 200 people were being crazy and fighting the police, out of 1 to 1.5 million people, from my estimate. And then the FBI has been going out of their way to arrest all those people and putting thousands of man hours into it. But like, what happened to the people that were throwing firebombs at the federal building for dozens and dozens and hundreds of days? Like,
or the guy who literally threw a Molotov cocktail directly at the police in Portland.
Oh yeah, that happened actually multiple times. Multiple times that happened.
I believe it. I just have only ever found like 2 videos of it ever. But that's attempted murder. You know, you get caught in one of those things, you're fucked. That's why I'm like, how does this?
Well, you're not actually fucked. They just arrested one of them in Portland recently. One of the guys that threw a Molotov cocktail at police officers. He got.
Well, I meant if you get hit by a Molotov cocktail, you're fucked. But yeah, go on.
Yeah. All he got was 48 months. Threw a firebomb at a police officer, and he got 48 months in prison. That's it.
That doesn't even. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that. I know if I was armed and somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at me, I'm shooting them. You know, period. You know, like you're trying to kill me. You know, like that's if you manage to get caught, like the one I've seen, you know, this person pitches it over, and I actually thought it was a girl because it was somebody who was very slim, you know, dressed in black bloc, throws it at the police line, and fortunately enough, they all got out of the way. You know, if it had actually gone off like on a police line, like it probably would have caught like 3 or 4 of them on fire, and they may not die, but that's an attempt to kill you. I mean, that's especially, you know, and it's a large group of them like that all stuck together. You know, somebody who does that should just be gone. And I mean, if you're going to use a firebomb directly on another human being, you better either be in a war, you know, you know, and I guess maybe that's what they think, because some of them have kind of convinced themselves that they're in a war, you know, in their little skirmishes with police that are ordered not to shoot them, you know. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying, and I can understand why they're getting more paranoid. I mean, especially that, you know, that somebody finally walked up and shot one of them. I guess, you know, like what you're talking about, though, with the way that you were received, like, you know, if you're on the left, then fuck you, is the other thing I've noticed is that people don't understand or want to recognize that there are multiple levels of this thing. Like, just for like a random accident, because my kids are involved in the sport of wrestling, for whatever reason, on my non-activist account, I have a bunch of Trump supporters. Like, I didn't go seek them out and befriend them. I befriended them at wrestling tournaments, and I was able to talk to them politely about politics because they know me, and some of my leftist friends that were also on my personal Facebook would try to like get in and start throwing insults, and I tell them to cut it out. And, I had a good, reasonable conversation with these people, but I cannot have that with the left right now. And the funny thing is I'm one of them. I voted for Bernie. I consider myself like a Nordic model, social democrat, but if you deviate from any little piece of what they think, they spit on you. Like you're automatically the complete opposite. Like I had some idiot the other day tell me, oh, well, social democrats are just what we call social fascists. I was like, so Bernie Sanders is a fascist now. Okay. They have these like, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, like George Bush, and his policy, in the war on terror. And there's no middle ground. You either go along with everything they say.
That too. Like either you're with us or you're one of the pedophiles.
Right. No, and I'm not saying that they don't. I just have less experience with it because I don't. When I interact with the right, I make it clear who I am, but I'm pretty good at, because I understand how they talk and how they think, I can make sure that I communicate with them in such a way that doesn't set them off. Which is actually, when I was at Occupy, they would call me like the right whisperer or whatever, because they would send me to go talk to like the Tea Party if they showed up to discuss things with us, because they knew that I could communicate with them. But no, this is a problem that is definitely afflicting both sides. And I think it sucks for the more reasonable people on the left, because not only do they technically not really have a home, like any headway that Bernie Sanders might have made towards making people more interested in some of the programs that they use in countries like Denmark is all gone because of assholes waving communist flags, like burning and destroying shit. I'm actually on a couple of forums with anarcho-communists, and I point, they're like, are we ever going to succeed in what we're doing? And I'm like, well, I can tell you're not really going to convince too many people that what you want to suggest is the better way to live is going to work if your strategy is to burn people's property down and beat them up for not agreeing with you. Nobody's going to agree that we don't need a state and we don't need cops if that's how you're going to go about, convincing people. And I expected to get ripped for saying that, because normally you would, but surprisingly, they were pretty quiet. So I was like, because there's nothing wrong about what I just said there. There's no way to argue that that's a good strategy to convince people. So I guess then when we talk about like the anatomy of how these things go down, would you say Drew Hernandez's like statement of this is kind of how it goes? Like we have a riot that gets started and then it gets declared an unlawful assembly and then they start trying to arrest people. Is that pretty much what your experience with the chronology of events is?
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Well, I'm just saying, do you when you're out there, do you witness it basically happening like that? That you have the two sides starting, Antifa might throw something at the cops declared an unlawful assembly, the cops then start moving on the protesters, and then that's kind of when the cameras start rolling for the Antifa side of things, but is that more or less like the way you see things go down when you're out there?
Pretty much. And as I said earlier, I don't think the cops are actually trying to pursue justice or what's right or wrong. They're just trying to avoid conflict. And so they're going to try to declare an unlawful assembly as quick as possible so they can just disperse the crowd and not have to deal with the situation. They're not concerned with actually protecting First Amendment rights and the right to protest. They're not concerned with who is causing the violence in these things, because they could easily just go in there and like decide like, oh, these people throw bottles, let's get those people out of the area and allow the others to continue their First Amendment rights. And granted, it's hard when there's a big crowd going on, but continually I've been very disappointed in the police across the country the last year.
Well, it sounds like they're just trying to contain it, and like that's what they think is the best that they're going to be able to accomplish. I'm not saying I agree with that, but
it's an authoritarian thing. It's that We will have the a right to control order in society. You don't need your First Amendment rights. We'll just handle everything. Just do what we say, and we'll handle everything according to our judgment.
Well, ironically, that's what
so
Antifa and Black Lives Matter sound like too.
Yeah, any of these fascist totalitarian groups, but the police in big cities, the police in big cities are more and more doing that. They're not concerned with who's right or who's wrong. They're just concerned with the perceived peace of society. So it doesn't matter if there's a facade piece that's going to cause like trouble way down the road. Just today, if people are arguing in the street, all they care about is getting people out of the street, not in who is arguing justly and who's arguing violently. It's just we're in control and we're going to handle this according to our views. We don't care about your First Amendment rights and that sort of thing.
Well, that kind of
I'm
reminds
jaded
me.
on a lot of this because it's been really hard to watch the police stand by, and there's videos and videos and videos over the last couple of years from Portland and other cities where the police, you'll see someone getting attacked, you'll see people attacking vehicles, and then the camera will pan over to several dozen officers just standing there watching this happening, doing nothing, and it's just, okay, I understand the police don't have an obligation to uphold rights and help people when they're being hurt, but I still am at very, very big risk of getting a parking ticket or a speeding ticket, or if I do anything wrong, the police are going to be there. I have to fear the police, but I don't have any justification to assume the police are going to stand up for my rights.
That kind of reminds me of what was going on in Kenosha when I was studying the Kyle Rittenhouse incident. Was that they were basically just kind of driving around in their armored vehicles, moving the crowd from place to place, but really not doing much else. Like they were trying to keep them out of the main city, and that was their one objective, but they didn't do anything else. Now, I've heard them say things like that they kind of need like 10-to-1 numbers to be able to arrest somebody in a crowd, especially if that crowd's hostile and is trying to hit you. And I've also heard things like people saying that police have just kind of determined that it's too much of a liability. I mean, like when you think about it, from the stuff that happened in the Wii Spa, like that clip of that cop basically taking his billy club and hitting that guy right in the head, they play that. They don't play any of the stuff that led up to it. They don't play any of the things that guy might have done to bring that on. And then they get that cop's name and his badge number. And if Antifa can succeed in doing so, they will dox him, which, don't get me wrong, this is not a justification. I still feel that, that action should be taken. And I honestly think that, unfortunately, like you said, spoiled kids, we're spoiling these kids to think that they can just show up and do this anytime they want because we're not doing anything about it. And then the more people you embolden to do that, the more that are going to do that. And it's like the other effect that I've seen of it is because nothing's being done about it. Like the stuff on the 3rd is enraging to watch. When you watch that video of them just picking off, one protester at a time and beating the crap out of them and, stealing from them, it makes you angry. Even if you agree with them to some extent, you're like, man, these guys are just a bunch of bullies, and then, so what happens with that? Well, just like I said earlier, with the Rittenhouse incident, the group that he was part of showed up because they were sick of the cops just letting them go business to business and systematically burn down Kenosha.
Okay. All right. So anyway, yeah. So is it your experience then that it seems like the police, for some reason, are more proactive if there's two opposing groups?
Yeah, many times over the last year, I've seen the police just stand by and watch Antifa do their crimes, stop traffic, assault people's vehicles. But definitely when there's an opposing group or a conservative right-wing crowd there to try to handle the I guess law enforcement themselves, then the police definitely step in. And I think it has to do with like an authority kind of thing. Like the police are like fine determining what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow when it's one group. But when another group comes in because they're upset with what the police are doing or not doing, then the police are really quick to come in and stop things.
Yeah,
and it's frustrating because it's like a double-edged sword. Like people are getting frustrated because they want the police to step in, but the police don't want to step in. But then they're scared if they step in, that the police will step in and arrest them for trying to stop what's happening.
Right, and the leftist perspective on it also is that nobody should oppose them. Like, when I discuss Kyle Rittenhouse with them, it's like, well, he shouldn't even have been there. And I'm like, okay, neither should have any of you. Like, you were just going into the city to burn down businesses, some of which were owned by people of color, but all they talk about is Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been there. And I don't think Kyle Rittenhouse would have been there, and I don't think any of those other guys would have been there if the police were doing something about the systematic destruction of the city. I guess, you try to devil's advocate a little bit. I mean, I've watched a video where they kind of describe how police strategies against riots work. And in one of them, and I'll send this to you because it's pretty informative, but was that they don't believe that they're ever going to have enough people to actually stop a riot. So therefore, they just try to keep it contained. And I can see why that would still be really frustrating, especially if you're just, you're watching Antifa beat people up and then nobody does anything about it, but yeah, it is interesting that they do seem to be more interested if two groups are going at it. They definitely didn't do that in Kenosha. Kenosha, they just let BLM do whatever they wanted within reason, but they moved them around with their armored vehicles, and then that was the extent of it. But, I guess, bearing all of this in mind now, are you going to keep doing this? Have you been able to essentially secure a situation where you're going to be able to continue to give this coverage? Because I hope you are, because we need more people that are really more interested in the truth than they are in pushing an agenda.
Yeah, I don't even know. I'm kind of a crazy person and just flying around by the seat of my pants. So if things interest me, I'll go out there. But it's really demoralizing to go out there and film this stuff and show people and show that the cops are not doing anything. It's demoralizing seeing the cops not doing anything, but still being subject to the law for the cops. And it's demoralizing to see people that want to watch my videos but then don't do anything. The whole thing for me has been really, when I go to these events, I'm actually depressed for several days afterwards. I hate seeing the violence, and I hate seeing the lack of law and order. And I hate seeing these horrible, selfish people hurting other people to get their way. One of the things that really, really bothers me is I've been noticing more and more, you'll see the clips of me talking to the heavyset girl at the Wii Spa, and she's irate. She's having a histrionic fit. And
right.
She's part of the left, she's on their side, and she's acting crazy as heck, and nobody from her team is coming up and taking care of her. Hey, you're having a mental breakdown. Let's but they're just they're letting her, because it works in their favor. She's drawing attention, and she's screaming, and she's causing chaos, but they obviously don't care about her, because if they cared about her, they would while she's having her mental fits, they would come and try to condole her and try to calm her down and try to point her towards something better for herself. But so many of these protests have one of them there. It's like the Antifa Karen, and she's just screaming irately and just losing her mind and embarrassing herself on a national stage. They don't seem to care about her.
Right. That's, and I agree with you. I remember you mentioning on another broadcast that there does seem to be one of these people at every one of these damn things, and it's almost like maybe they are hoping the cops will do something to her, so that they can have video of that. They attack innocent girl, they've already got in a video of one girl getting hit in the hand by a beanbag round. The cops are identifying their motive as they do show video of Antifa throwing something in their direction before that round went out. But it feels like when it comes to the kinds of personalities we were just discussing, there seems to just be some angry screaming person at every one of these things. And it's funny because, it's another scenario where they're basically doing all of this and getting away with it because the cops aren't doing anything about it. But when things finally do go down, it's it's crazy to watch, how they get confused when they start getting beat up. It's like, I remember we discussed this before we went on the air, was like these kinds of people that are getting this notion that they're a lot more dangerous than they really are because they've gone to protest and screamed at people successfully. And I described a video clip that I saw once of, because it definitely goes differently if there's no cops to keep them separated, but the Proud Boys were fighting this group of Antifa, and that's something I remember you saying, is like you feel sorry for some of these people who are like skinny guys, or petite girls, or out of shape people who've basically been convinced that they're warriors, and in the clip that I'm talking about, like they face up against the Proud Boys, who are usually giant dudes, and this girl steps forward to the front of the line and swings at one of them, so they punch her in the face. And it's like she's got this confused look on her face, like, wait a minute, this isn't going down the way I expected. Like they're living in a world where, we're going to CGI in the action sequences to make them into Captain Marvel or something. Do you want to comment a little bit just on your feelings about how it seems like these people are getting emboldened to believe, that they're warriors?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You see these little petite women like getting in the faces of grown men, and it's usually in the context of like right by the police or right by the mob of people. And these grown men are motivated by not wanting to punch a woman. They're also motivated by not wanting to be the one that gets arrested by the cops. And there's also a mob there that might jump them. But every once in a while, these crazy girls, like you said, they just like slap or punch a man in the face, and then she gets laid out, and then she just like has this like shattering of her perception of reality. Like it didn't work out the way she thought that it did when all those like female action heroes in the movies beat up 17 grown men by herself. Like it's just a delusion, and I feel sorry for them, because like, if you really thought that you were a 5'2" woman and you're going to beat like 3 grown men,
well, right, and that's like, they sometimes it seems like they almost do it on purpose. Like I don't know if you watched the video that I believe was taken from the Third, where there's 2 Korean guys there, and one of them is wearing a rooftop Korean T-shirt, so that gets Antifa's attention, and they go over and they start harassing the guys, and they're arguing with him, and one of them was wearing like an MMA gym T-shirt that had some lightning bolts on it that they were trying to say were like Nazi SS symbols. And I'm like, right, that's what it is. It's a Korean person wearing a Nazi SS shirt. And it's like, so they're just antagonizing over and over again, and they're arguing with them. And then emerging out of the Antifa crowd is this scrawny, I thought it was a girl. I heard it might have actually been a transgender person, but they go up and they start punching at the guy. And so the guy uses his water bottle and just lays them out, and then, right. And then the police show up and promptly arrest him within seconds. And he's like, I'm just defending myself. They shoved me, and that's when it almost seems like, they're hoping for their photo op. Like, oh, did you see that guy just like lay out that, that skinny, innocent girl, it sometimes it does feel like that's it, is that they almost kind of want you to do that. And then they're always big on, you just hit a girl, even if the girl hit somebody first, like even if they slapped somebody, even if they punched at someone, even if they, and I guess that comes back to the things Hernandez was saying when he's just saying is that they're looking for photo ops. They're looking for sound bites and video clips, and they look to try to create situations that will allow them to create their own propaganda machine, to say, well, this is how these people were, victimized. Did you see what happened to this peaceful protester? And they're hoping that people like you are not out there. And it's definitely clear when you see, people who have hidden cameras have managed to figure out how to do that. Well, they definitely weren't expecting to be filmed in that circumstance. That brings us back to the guy in Portland, but. So I'm glad that you're doing this. Now, if anybody listening to this wants to find your work, where are the best places to do so?
You can find me on my Facebook platform that has got nuked, and I recreated it, so it's very small. It's a Villian Report, Villain Report. My main place is YouTube, Villian Report. You can check me out on social media where I'm not supposed to have accounts. Brave the Soul. Brave the Soul is a hashtag I use, and you might be able to find me on there. But pretty much Villian Report or Brave the Soul. And if I'm got an active platform, you'll be able to find me there on whatever you're searching for me on.
Yeah, I would do what a lot of these other guys do and just make sure that when you do get a big platform like you had on YouTube, to constantly have a backup channel that you can send people to while you're big in case that ever happens. But what I will also do is I'll just have you email me all that and I'll put it in the description of this show. I want to thank you for coming on and spending this time with me, and I hope that in the future, if you go do more of this work, that you can come on and give me a more, direct, accounting from the ground of what you saw. And I would appreciate it because at this point we need more people doing what you're doing. I'm glad that you kind of, like you said, you don't even really consider yourself politically motivated, but at the end of the day, you're performing a service that's very much needed for people to have any kind of clarity. I will say in my own experience, because of the way that my own material works, unfortunately, the audience for people who are just unabashedly telling the truth is not as large as you might expect. Like I've lost some.
Yeah, all the people that are clipping my stuff and like making it sensational, they get a lot of views. Like they clip a clip of me talking to the overweight girl at We Spa and make a comment about how psycho and crazy she is, and that'll go like crazy. But me just like being reluctant to react to her and reluctant to like slander her and that sort of thing. That doesn't. But I provide the extremes, a place to come clip my footage and go viral. So, but
that's one of the things. That's one of the things that annoys me about that is that's why I said, like, one of the reasons I haven't monetized is I'm trying to avoid even having the temptation to be in that situation, because people they want to go viral because they want to get money, and if that's, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't mind going viral just because I want to have an audience for the stuff that I'm doing. But I agree with you that people will, I can see them doing something like that. I use that clip just because I've been trying to like find some answer to the question of how do you justify this position? Like because that's what, like when we said earlier in the broadcast, they're focused now on trying to say that it was just a hoax. But again, all these people are defending it. Like, even if it wasn't a hoax, that's what motivated me. I'm like, when I confronted Precious Child on Twitter, it's like, do you feel that this is okay? And the last time Precious Child responded to me was to say, well, pay me and I'll answer your question. Like, oh, okay. No, I'm not going to pay you. But the fact that you can't just answer me kind of makes your activism look a little questionable. And they keep going on their live streams to whine about, how bad it is to be trans in that area. But some of the stuff that they're saying that they're dealing with is like, you're just threatening my right to exist. I'm like, nobody showed up at the We Spa to protest that you exist, except for maybe the weird Christian people, but it's not that. It's, they don't want to confront the question, and they don't want anybody else to confront the question. And the few that have, like, it's always just, well, you're just going to have to deal with it because this is what makes me feel comfortable. So anyway, I think we've come full circle on that. I appreciate you coming on, stay in touch. I'd like you to, if you don't mind, stay on just a little bit longer here after I stop recording, just to have a brief after conversation with you. And, for those of you turning in and listening, thank you for listening to V Radio. Please share this podcast. That's the only contribution I'm looking for at this point. I've got a subscribe star and a Patreon, but I'm not pushing any of that stuff. That's mostly was all stuff I had set up from before. I'm not interested in money right now. If for some reason, because I am disabled, I get to a point where I'm financially not able to work, then I may try to do this again professionally, but that's not my objective at this point. But do share it because I definitely get throttled. The algorithm does not like anybody who tells the unfiltered truth. So thanks again for tuning into V Radio.